So this discussion follows on from the previous panel about, leveraging private sector finance into net zero. But this panel very much is focused on how local authorities develop investable net zero neighbourhoods and what that looks like. The challenge, as we've heard from the previous panel today, is about how cities and local authorities find the funding to do that at scale. So this session's all about how we integrate those projects and generate an integrated model for Net Zero Neighbourhoods. So as Greg said, I'm Zoe Jennings, Head of Programmes at 3CI, working on various initiatives in terms of mobilising finance into local net zero. I'll hand over to my panellists to introduce themselves. Stephen?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Wilding, Head of Net Zero Green Economy at London Borough of Hounslow. We're working on the Net Zero Neighbourhoods approach. We are actually doing this alongside a number of other... Okay. I mean, the room's small enough, isn't it? Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Yeah, so we are working on the Net Zero Neighbourhoods approach alongside a number of other London boroughs. So we lead a London Net Zero Neighbourhoods cohort, 10 other London boroughs, the GLA, 3CI, as part of that, supported by some consultancies as well.
This does work, so I'm assuming that you just hold it like this. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Mary Kerr. As Zoe said, I'm Climate Finance Manager for Glasgow City Council. The good news is that you had the leader of our council up before, so if you were in the previous session, I will be less eloquent in my providing you with the information, but a lot of this discussion will be focused around the Net Zero Neighbourhoods and the model for climate investment, which is what we're trying to create in Glasgow. So specifically, Govan Hill will be our focus, but I don't want to preempt any of your questions, Zoe, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mary. That's brilliant. Oh, so the session today. I've lost my notes now. Sorry about this. Okay, where did we get to? So the session, we're talking about the model to start with, which is really important. And then we'll hear from both Glasgow and Hounslow how things are happening, how we're translating that into action on the ground, which is the really exciting bit. So starting off, in terms of the model itself, so 3CI was set up, as you heard, to leverage private sector finance to help deliver those net zero ambitions because there's not enough money in the public purse to do so. So part of our role at 3CI is very much about convening. So we work with local authorities, investors and policymakers to pull the right people together to kind of tackle these challenges. We work on a number of programmes, and James referred to our national net zero project pipeline, where we've worked over the last few years in terms of collecting all that data on a number of projects. We now have 1,500 different projects in the pipeline across different asset classes, ranging from retrofitting to electric vehicle infrastructure, etc. And that's worth about 50 billion, and over 100 local authorities are contributing that. So we're now getting that sense of scale and be able to have those conversations, meaningful conversations with the private sector now. But the programme we're focusing on today is the Net Zero Neighbourhood model, and that is very much about the new way of structuring local net zero investment, but in the place. So instead of funding individual projects like energy efficiency upgrades, heat networks, etc., it's about bundling these together to make it more efficient and make it that place-based approach and being able to look at de-risking some of those projects and generating the scale that they need to have investable propositions at the local level. So now I've set the scene, let's get into some of the questions. So Stephen, I'd like to talk to you first. So how can you share how Hounslow is approaching its net zero neighbourhoods?
Yeah, so we started off looking at a borough-wide lens. So just for a bit of geographical context, Hounslow, you might not all know Hounslow compared to, say, Glasgow or other more brand recognition places, shall we say. So Hounslow, we're West London Borough, stretching from home counties in the furthest west, bordering Heathrow, all the way through to Chiswick, Zone 2 in the east, so we're a very large borough. We took a lens first looking across the whole borough at where might be best to explore further this net zero neighbourhoods approach. considering a number of factors. Don't want to get necessarily into the detail of all of that. But essentially, we landed then at 3 areas which are formally part of our feasibility study. And that was what has been approved by our cabinet. In terms of our preferred area, Cranford and Heston, we're looking at around 2 estates within that preferred area, each estate comprising around 400 to 600 properties, but the complete study area comprises around 3,500 homes. Mixed tenure, so that's an important one for us. This isn't about an approach only for the decarbonisation of our social housing portfolio, although that is a priority for us. So mixed tenure. And we've got a variety of archetypes in there. So it is predominantly post-war build, mixed, semi-detached, terraced housing, but there is a small amount of low-rise flats incorporated in that, and some non-traditional structures as well. So it gives us opportunity to focus in on a specific area, but also because we've got those 3 areas as part of the overall feasibility area, then we can kind of take a lens and a view based on what's going to be best, thinking about this approach for scaling potentially across the wider borough. Because the objective for us isn't in terms of just delivering a successful demonstrator. Ultimately, we want that demonstrator to be a pathway to wider borough delivery and scaling.
Brilliant, thank you. So over to you, Mary. What is Glasgow's vision for your Net Zero Neighbourhoods?
So specifically, I'll maybe go into a wee bit more depth about the area that we've chosen. So it's Govan Hill, and Councillor Aitken in the previous session had touched on that particular area. The reason that we've chosen that, and I know Councillor Aitken said if you can do it in Glasgow, you can do it anywhere, and there's a reason for that, because our Net Zero Neighbourhood is going to be a challenge, and we know and understand that. There's 18,000 residents within the area of Govan Hill, so it's pretty dense area. It does have some beautifully picturesque pre-1919 tenement buildings that give us a huge headache, because from a retrofit perspective, Matey had said £60,000 for retrofitting. That would get one of our flats retrofitted. Mixed tenure, same as what Stephen was saying, but the challenge that comes with that is obviously quite a lot of the people within this area as well sit within the fuel poverty bracket. How do they afford it, and how do we get into that space? So as Zoe was saying, it's looking into the package. What does that look like, and how do we create it in a way that it doesn't cost the person and put them into further poverty? And what we're doing essentially. So how do we use the finance in that way that it's going to obviously help them rather than hinder them?
Brilliant, thank you, Mary. And it's great because the work that we've been doing we've been working with over 40 local authorities across the UK on their specific net zero neighbourhoods. And these are the first 2 pilots in the UK where we're actually pioneering this model, which is really exciting. So the next section is about scaling and investment challenges. In terms of, this one's to both of you really, so what motivated your council to support this project, and what were the key reasons you were able to commit to the project?
I'll start off. Kind of links in with following on what Mary was saying, alongside that finance and investment, that is critical. So for us, we've got, if we take just our social homes portfolio only, we've got 13,000 properties there. We've got ambitious plans to decarbonise that entire stock. And conservatively, you're looking at around £600 million just for that social housing portfolio. Realistically, this isn't something that can come exclusively from grant funding. It's not really appropriate or realistic for the council to put in its own limited capital and revenue funding to be able to tackle that challenge, although we do recognise we need to have some skin in the game. So really, this is about leveraging in that private sector investment, but doing that in a responsible way, in a manner that doesn't place unacceptable risk on the public purse in terms of then the long-term impacts potentially to balance sheet and the range of services that the council needs to deliver. And ultimately, whilst the council is going to be a beneficiary of this, ultimately the objective here is delivering warmer, more comfortable, cheaper to run homes for residents. They are the beneficiaries. And what we see with this Net Zero Neighbourhoods approach is if this comfort model type of approach can work, then ultimately the private sector is getting its ROI from those energy bill savings. And it's a fair and equitable way then to deliver that transition.
Excellent, thank you. Mary, what are your thoughts?
So Glasgow was obviously on a journey with our model for climate
This one on?
No, we're back. So we were on a...
Gone? Yeah, go on. Use this.
Sorry. It's fed up of me talking already, which tends to happen. So we're obviously on the route to developing our model for climate investment. So that's very much focused on the delivery vehicle, but it's asset focused. So that's about control the controllables, as we like to say, within the council. So what assets do the council have, and how do we create the conditions that we're able to actually provide the infrastructure so that going forward we can establish the heat networks or get into that space that we can ensure that we're dealing with fuel poverty within that just transition. The Net Zero Neighbourhoods in particular has a focus on place. So from our perspective, we were already taking it from the strategic asset perspective, but we also had to look at it from a place side. So it was of particular interest, the Net Zero Neighbourhoods model was of particular interest for us driving that forward at a place-based position. Which obviously the biggest challenge for us, and the reason that we're developing the model for climate investment is that there's lots of finance allegedly. We've got climate projects and we've got procurement in the middle that we need to work out what's the best way that we can actually deliver this.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, that point you just said there, because what we've been doing at 3CI, you know, when we set up the Net Zero Investment Task Force last year that Catherine McGuinness chaired with NatWest and others on it, James is on that. One of the key things that we asked them to look at was the Net Zero model and critique it and how it was going to work from a practical perspective from their side. So it's about, you know, because we speak with different languages. One of the key recommendations of that came out of that work was about how we should actually look at developing investment term sheets for not just specific asset classes, but also how the bundling aspect and how you aggregate that and what that looks like. So I'm really excited about this third phase of work and how we translate that investment term sheet work and then build it into the investment case work, because I think there's a lot to learn for everybody else. So I guess on that really, Stephen, how does the Net Zero Neighbourhood model help Hounslow unlock private sector interest? Have you seen that yet? I mean, it might be too early to talk about that, and what is the appeal of the model for local authorities as a way to bring in the private sector investment?
I think some bits probably already covered, so just trying to avoid retracing old ground. But I think if we talk around some of the challenges as well in terms of the private sector investment. So I think two key challenges that we're grappling with is we're going to be part of an initial first wave of demonstrators. It's not just us. There's a few other boroughs alongside us there, London, Glasgow, around the country. Realistically, for those first wave of demonstrators, we aim to have success at bringing in private sector investment, but there will be an element where the public sector purse is going to need to come in as well to prove the concept, prove the pathway, and hopefully then over time we leverage further private sector investment and bring down that public contribution. So the tension of the public sector private contribution and balance there is one key challenge. In addition to that, as I said, for us, this is about transferring the cost of this, not just solely sitting on our balance sheet. So how do we embed that comfort fee and the billing mechanism such that there's a fair payment there that is being made by the resident, ROI back to the private sector, the initial inflows of that private sector capital, and as I said, an appropriate balance of what we as the public sector put in to support that.
Great. It's not easy stuff, is it? So, Mary, what are the biggest challenges for you that you see in Govan Hill?
Probably the majority of the same as what Stephen said, but to be honest with you, I'm going to take a quote from earlier whenever it was somebody had mentioned that you need the wealth before you know how to distribute, and that's the big thing for us. Obviously, we have to understand what, as we had mentioned, what the package of projects is. How do we create this in a way that it does create a revenue so that we're not actually looking for additional funding and that it can wash its own face, essentially. But how do you get to that stage, which is the big thing, and certainly from the Investors Network perspective that 3CI have created as well, Zoe, that gives the local authorities that additional benefit. It also breaks down exactly what you were saying with the language barrier, because I think we're very clear that when we say investment term sheet, we think of something different from what the financiers are saying investment term sheet. So it's how do we get into that place that we're all speaking the same language and that we are driving forward together in a way that it's a shared risk. It's very much about that shared risk approach.
Yeah, that's Stephen.
And I think, I mean, you were saying around where we've got to Hounslow. So, yeah, we have been progressing the feasibility study and we're getting towards the end of that. But still, even at that point, we're not going to be able to kind of completely de-risk and eliminate all of the uncertainty. There are going to be certain assumptions that are required and built into our modelling and that kind of information. So it's the level of confidence that we need to give to the investor side, and that, as you're saying, it's that understanding to what level of assurance and certainty do we need to provide, but actually can it be a two-way conversation in terms of actually there might be a point at which we can't de-risk to that point. So yeah, going through those kind of tensions.
Yeah, and I think it's just recognising that we are working in the capacity of the local authority as well. So it's very much about what's the benefits from our community's perspective and how do we ensure that we get the most out of any package that we are creating for them. So we're very aware, certainly in Glasgow, of the additional social value that the models can potentially provide us, and then the fact that that can help address things like child poverty. And things that are happening within those spaces, fuel poverty as well, for our communities. So it's very, very much focused on that. But it's the risk balance, Stephen, and I suppose it's recognising the fact that the local authorities don't have the finances to put in it anymore, and it is a case that there are finances available, but how do we utilise them in the most innovative ways?
Yeah, and I think it's thank you, Mary. It's that's why I think this project is very exciting, because we're doing it together collectively with the right partners. So we're doing it with the banking partners. We're doing it from the local authorities' perspective, so we can address those differing priorities, but come together to have a solution that works for everybody. Brilliant. So I guess the last section is really about the future vision and looking ahead, and what does success look like from your perspective. For your Net Zero neighbourhood, because there's going to be a lot of other followers who are going to be learning from what you're doing, because it's so innovative.
So I think building on the conversation that we've been having, we talked a lot around the fuel poverty side, and it's the same for us in terms of the areas that we've chosen. We've chosen areas where we can maximise the benefits in terms of addressing cost of living, energy efficiency, fuel poverty challenges. But then the socioeconomic challenges and the broader context of those areas may not mean that they're the most attractive projects and areas from a private sector investment perspective. So I think in terms of if we're looking at a kind of optimal vision for the application of this net zero neighbourhoods approach, it's doing it in a way where we can pick up those areas most in need first, but also thinking pragmatically around we don't have to necessarily go for the most severe challenged area first, but it should be somewhere appropriate on that scale, and making sure that then that approach is carried through and it's not a kind of cherry picking type of situation. I think ultimately as well, we want to land at a place where the net zero neighbourhoods approach is essentially for those who really need it. It's eliminating that upfront cost of retrofit, which we know that a lot of households won't have the savings to do themselves, or the ability to finance based on long payback periods. So we want that net zero neighbourhoods approach to also though sit complementary alongside the able to pay market. So how those two mesh together. And yeah, that's probably the...
So Mary, what does success look like for you? Is there any practical outcomes that you'd like to see?
Yeah, and I think just reflecting on that, Stephen, I think Glasgow are clearly ambitious, and obviously we like a challenge. So the area that we've chosen is, we recognise that it is going to be a challenge. And I suppose ultimate success is improving people's lives. It's actually that community focus, but being realistic about it, the actual success from our perspective is the shared learnings. So this is about us doing the demonstrators and getting into a position where we're actually able to share our learnings with other local authorities. So we're having those conversations with the market, we're having the conversations with the investors, and we're trying to work out, right, what are the models that are available. Glasgow's focus obviously on tenement buildings. There will be other local authorities that have tenement buildings within their portfolio. So it's things like that, and actually being able to share the learnings and drive them forward, and that's with the help of 3CI as well, obviously.
Thanks, Mary. We've got some questions. We've got some interesting questions, actually. One of them's around, there was a few actually around community engagement, community buy-in, which we've done a bit of work on this already at 3CI, but one of the questions is, how have you generated community buy-in, or how do you plan for it within the Net Zero Neighbourhood? And I know, Stephen, you've done a lot of work on
Yeah. So as I said, we've progressed the feasibility study fairly far. And so we have done a lot on the community engagement side. So we took a resident researcher approach. So we worked alongside an organisation called Young Foundation, and we recruited those residents to be the lead in this process, supported by the consultants, and they facilitated then the workshops and the surveys, etc. And then we brought in a wider resident panel as part of that. And that has been very successful. So the challenge for us is maintaining that interest and momentum, recognising that we're not in a position to go straight into delivery, but there's lots of other relevant climate work going on. In terms of key findings from that, high-level findings, what we found, so when we initially went into this, we kind of felt that broader offer of the neighbourhood improvements was going to be a key sell for this to residents. But actually what we found going through the engagement process is that the neighbourhood improvements are something of a bonus, but perhaps not, and we shouldn't be surprised, the core benefit and enthusiasm came from the home retrofit offer. That's primarily what people were interested in. And actually there was less desire around kind of putting in new assets, EV infrastructure, active travel, etc. There was a lot of interest around, actually we think there's a lot of good things in our existing place, and what we want you to do is to concentrate on that core retrofit offer and enhance what's there, improve what's there. We don't need necessarily loads of new tree planting, loads of new additional infrastructure and assets. But a key challenge that came out of that was around the we're not in a position yet to articulate exactly how that model will apply to that household and to those individual people. So I think a big thing which we need to get out of this investment case phase and the work that's going on in other areas is precisely what is the practical mechanism for how this comfort fee is going to work. So us, Hounslow, and there's other London boroughs, we're kind of looking at that energy services agreement type of approach. But nothing really concrete has been set out there in terms of how that will work on a practical level. And for residents to really buy in, they need that level of detail, to be honest.
Yeah, I think just adding to that as well, I think we recognise the fact the majority of this will be about behavioural change. It'll be obviously encouraging people to potentially be asked to be putting heat networks into their house, which could mean a lot of disruption. So community buy-in is going to be huge for us. We're obviously recognising that as well in Glasgow. We've taken on a PhD student, which is a slightly different take on a PhD. It's not get to the end, we get a report, where we've got a working PhD, which is somebody working alongside us, and the title is Climate Just Finance, and that's very much about the engagement, how we engage, and how do we actually bring it to the people so that they fully understand exactly what we're saying, why we're saying it, and how we drive that forward. So that's very much focused on the messaging and encouraging behavioural change in the buy-in.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a really interesting way of doing it. I've not heard of that before. That's brilliant. We've got one question here about how are we ensuring that the learnings from all of our projects are going to be replicated across the country, and so that more projects get more efficient. And I guess that's one for me, really. You know, I think it's not just about individual places. It's about creating that systemic shift in terms of how we finance net zero neighbourhoods across the UK. And part of what we're doing together is creating a national programme in terms of these net zero neighbourhoods. And we're going to launch shortly a national net zero neighbourhood forum, which is going to be chaired by Victoria Lawson, who's Chief Exec at Islington, and previously at Hounslow.
Yeah,
She's got a lot of experience in this space. So we'll be able to do all that knowledge sharing and all that best practice to make it sure it gets disseminated across the UK. I think we're done, actually. I think we're just about done. So I'd like to say thank you very much to the panellists. It's really interesting to hear what's happening on the ground in real-life projects. And thank you to the audience for listening.
And thank you to Zoe.